Elena had always been a quiet soul, the kind who found comfort in the rustling pages of old books rather than in the buzz of crowded hallways. The university was a small haven, a place where she hoped to lose herself and maybe find something more. A voice, a purpose, or even a spark of warmth in the otherwise cold world she felt trapped in. On a crisp autumn morning, with leaves turning amber and gold, she stepped into the lecture hall where Professor Adrian Clark would soon become the axis of her world. Professor Clark was nothing like the other lecturers she had encountered before. His presence was calm but magnetic, his voice soft yet commanding, weaving stories of literature with such passion that the ancient texts seemed to breathe again under his guidance. Elena's heart fluttered the first time he smiled at her during class. A brief, almost shy gesture that she replayed endlessly in her mind afterward. At first, it was admiration. Elena admired his intellect, the way he challenged ideas and encouraged his students to think beyond the surface. But soon, admiration blossomed into something far more complicated. She found herself lingering after class, clutching her books with trembling hands, hoping for just a few moments more in his company. She began to notice every detail, the way his eyes crinkled when he laughed, the faint scent of cedarwood that seemed to follow him, and the kindness in his tone when he corrected a student's misunderstanding. Elena's emotions were a tangled web she could neither understand nor control. Each day, the ache inside her chest grew stronger, a mixture of hope and fear. She was painfully aware that she was crossing invisible lines, that this was a love born not out of shared experiences, but from distance and longing. Yet, the feelings were undeniable. One afternoon, during office hours, Elena found herself confessing more than academic questions. She spoke of her loneliness, her struggles to belong, and how Professor Clark's classes were the only place she felt seen. He listened attentively, his eyes softening with empathy. For a fleeting moment, she believed she had touched something real in his heart. But reality was unyielding. Behind the warmth she saw in his eyes, there was a shadow she couldn't ignore. A subtle hesitation, a guardedness that whispered of secrets. She had overheard rumors whispered among classmates. Professor Clark was married, his wife often away on long trips, their relationship strained and fragile. Elena tried to push the knowledge away, telling herself that feelings could be innocent, that admiration did not have to lead to pain. Still, the lines between student and teacher blurred in quiet ways. One evening, after a particularly intense class debate on the nature of love in Shakespeare's sonnets, Professor Clark invited Elena to stay behind. The room was empty, the air thick with the scent of old books and fading daylight. "You have a rare insight," he said quietly, looking directly at her. "You see the undercurrents that many miss." Elena's heart hammered in her chest. She struggled to find words, suddenly feeling exposed. "Thank you, Professor," she whispered. They talked for a long time that evening, about literature, about life, about the invisible burdens people carry. Elena shared pieces of her own story, her voice breaking as she spoke of moments of isolation she had never voiced before. Professor Clark listened, offering gentle encouragement and a presence that felt like a fragile lifeline. But beneath the kindness, Elena sensed a storm raging within him. His eyes flickered with pain and regret, and once, she caught a glimpse of tears that he quickly blinked away. She wanted to reach out, to heal the invisible wounds she imagined. Yet, she was painfully aware of the distance their lives kept. He was a man bound by commitments she could never break. Days turned into weeks, and Elena's feelings deepened into a secret ache. She wrote poetry, inspired by the moments they shared, verses filled with longing and despair, but never dared to show them. At night, she lay awake, torn between hope and the knowledge that what she desired might never be hers. Her closest friend, Mara, noticed the change in her, how Elena's eyes brightened when she spoke of Professor Clark, and how a shadow of sadness would fall when the conversation ended. Mara warned her gently, reminding her of the dangers of loving someone unavailable, of the pain that often followed. "I know," Elena whispered one evening, tears spilling down her cheeks. "But it's not just love. It's the first time I've ever felt truly seen." The internal conflict was unbearable. Elena wanted to protect her heart, yet she was helpless against the gravity of her feelings. Every glance, every word from Professor Clark was a small world unto itself, a world she wanted to inhabit but knew she could not. One chilly evening, as the sun dipped behind the trees, casting long shadows across the campus, Elena found herself waiting outside the lecture hall after class. She had promised herself she wouldn't, but the pull was too strong. When Professor Clark emerged, their eyes met, and for a moment, the bustling world around them seemed to fade. He paused, hesitation flickering across his face. "Elena," he said softly, "I'm glad you stayed." Words failed her. Instead, she nodded, her throat tight. The silence between them was heavy, filled with things unspoken, yearnings, regrets, and the painful knowledge of what could never be. That moment marked a fragile turning point, the quiet spark igniting a fire that neither dared to name aloud. As she walked home that night, the city lights blurred through her tears. Elena understood that her heart had embarked on a path from which there might be no return. A path of bittersweet longing, where love was both a refuge and a torment. And so, beneath the fading autumn sky, a silent lesson began. A lesson in the cruel beauty of unrequited love, in the pain of shadows between truth and desire, and in the fragile hope that sometimes the deepest connections are those that remain unspoken. Winter crept quietly into the town, its chill seeping into Elena's bones, mirroring the cold distance that slowly crept between her and Professor Clark. The leaves had long since fallen, leaving bare branches like skeletal fingers clawing at the gray sky. And with the fading warmth of autumn, so too seemed to fade the fragile hope Elena had nurtured in her heart. Despite her attempts to hold herself together, Elena found it impossible to forget him. His words, his smile, the way his gaze lingered just a moment too long, all haunted her waking thoughts. She tried to distance herself, telling herself that this infatuation was a dangerous mirage, one she must resist before it consumed her completely. But every time she walked past the lecture hall or heard his name whispered in the corridors, her resolve crumbled. Professor Clark was no stranger to his own torment. His marriage, once full of promise, had withered under years of neglect and unspoken resentments. His wife, Marianne, was distant in both body and spirit, caught up in her own world, leaving him to carry the heavy silence that filled their home. The news of her recent pregnancy was something he kept close to his chest, a reminder of the responsibilities he could not escape and a future he did not know how to face. The weight of these realities pressed down on him every day, making the moments with Elena both a balm and a torment. Her youthful hope and vulnerability stirred emotions long buried: compassion, regret, and something dangerously close to love. But with every smile shared in passing, every fleeting touch of a hand as he handed her a book, the chasm between duty and desire yawned wider. One afternoon, the tension reached a breaking point. Elena had stayed late in the library, lost in her thoughts and the warmth of the quiet room, when Professor Clark appeared, his figure silhouetted against the fading light. Their eyes met, and an unspoken understanding passed between them. This was no longer just a student-teacher relationship. "Can we talk?" he asked, voice low and hesitant. Elena nodded, heart pounding, as she followed him to a secluded corner. The conversation began cautiously, each word measured, heavy with the weight of unspoken feelings. "I care about you," he said finally, the confession hanging fragile in the cold air. "More than I should." Tears pricked at Elena's eyes. "But you're married." He looked away, shame flickering across his features. "I know, I'm trapped between what I want and what I owe." For a moment, they sat in silence, the impossible truth settling over them like a winter fog. Elena's heart shattered in 1,000 silent pieces, but beneath the pain was a strange relief. He was human, flawed, and just as lost as she was. As days passed, the bittersweet reality took hold. Elena learned of Marianne's pregnancy through whispers and a chance encounter. The news felt like a cruel blow, tearing open wounds she had barely begun to heal. She wanted to retreat into herself, to disappear from the tangled web of emotions, but the bond with Professor Clark held tight. The professor himself became more distant, torn between his obligations and the connection he could not sever. He tried to keep their interactions strictly professional, but the magnetic pull between them was relentless. Each glance was a silent apology, each conversation a battle between heart and mind. One evening, after a particularly painful day, Elena received a letter slipped under her door. The handwriting was unmistakable. Professor Clark's. "Elena, this is the hardest letter I've ever had to write. I want you to know how deeply you have touched my life, how your presence has brought light to days I thought were endlessly dark. But I cannot let this continue. My responsibilities are clear, and I must honor them, no matter the cost to my own heart or yours. You deserve a love that is whole and free, not one shadowed by secrets and sacrifice. Please forgive me, and please forgive yourself. This is not the end of your story. It is only a painful chapter." Adrian Elena held the letter close, her tears soaking the fragile paper. The finality of his words was both a release and a torment. She felt abandoned and yet strangely grateful. The cruel truth was that love, in its purest form, sometimes meant letting go. That night, she walked alone through the snow-covered campus, the cold biting her cheeks. The world was silent except for the crunch of her footsteps and the distant murmur of a life moving on without her. Her breath formed fragile clouds in the air as she clutched the letter to her chest. Memories flooded her mind, the stolen moments of laughter, the shared silences, the warmth she once thought eternal. She whispered a quiet goodbye to the man who had become her greatest lesson in love and loss. In the weeks that followed, Elena tried to rebuild herself. She buried her pain in books and study, channeling her heartbreak into poetry that captured the ache of unfulfilled dreams. The campus felt emptier without his presence, Yet she found strength in the quiet corners, where she had first dared to hope. Professor Clark remained a ghost in her life, sometimes a name in the news, sometimes a face in a crowded hallway. Their paths no longer crossed, but the lessons lingered, shaping her understanding of love's complexity. Elena's story was not one of triumphant romance or fairy tale endings. It was a story of longing and restraint, of the cruel beauty found in what can never be. It was a lesson written in shadows and light, a reminder that some loves teach us most profoundly when they are never spoken aloud. If you enjoyed this heartfelt story, please give it a like and subscribe to our channel for more touching tales like this. Your support means the world to us and helps us create more stories that warm the heart. Don't forget to hit the notification bell so you never miss an update. Thank you for watching and being part of our story family.